The key is to understand this dynamic so you can at least start to identify it and slowly maybe even break out of some of the self-blame cycles as well as the self-doubt, because you're not going to really be able to fix the situation. Let's talk about sort of an oil and water thing, which is empathy and entitlement. And specifically, let's talk about what happens when empathy meets entitlement. Empathy is I would say, primary trunk of the narcissistic tree. It doesn't matter if someone is a vulnerable or grandiose or malignant or communal or self-righteous narcissist. All of them are entitled. It may come out in different ways. The vulnerable narcissistic person's entitlement is a sort of failure to launch, I deserve more from the world, victimized kind of entitlement. The grandiose narcissist entitlement is more of a sachet to the head of the line and say I'm a VIP entitlement. The malignant entitlement is more of a you will do as I say because I said it, menacey entitlement. The self-righteous entitlement is more of a I am right and morally superior, so it's my way or the highway entitlement. The communal entitlement is a everyone has to do what I say because I am a savior and what I'm doing is actually more important than the rest of you because I help people. But at the core of it all, it's entitlement. The sense that they are more special than you, that their needs are more important, that they are entitled to better treatment, that they're just simply more important than other people, and that they can say and do what they want without any consequence or taking any responsibility because they are somehow special. Research has clearly shown that entitlement is the consistent through line of narcissism and is one of those qualities of narcissism that is bothersome, whether you are a stranger meeting the narcissistic person for the first time or if you've known them for years. The entitled person takes very good care of themselves. They demand what they want from everyone. And many, many entitled people will actually pitch this as a good quality in themselves. They'll actually say, and not feel bad about it, say, I know what I want. I know what I deserve, so I go get it. Or they're just assertive, or they'll say, like, I paid more, so I deserve more. And they really say those things without, like, cringing at all. It's not the deserving or the assertiveness or even getting the product or service or experience they deserve. It's the belief that they deserve it more than anyone else. There is a line that many people, for example, might be waiting in at a store or something, but somehow they believe they don't deserve waiting in that line. But I guess the rest of us do, right? So entitlement inherently carries within it a lack of awareness of the needs or wants or time of other people. The entitled person will demand that someone changes a seat with them on an airplane so they can sit next to someone they want, with little regard for the fact that they are offering a less good seat to the person they are asking to switch with them, or without regard for the idea that that person chose that seat for a deliberate reason. The entitled person will snap their fingers at a busy server and wonder why they aren't getting served when there are 4 other tables who have been waiting longer than them. The entitled person will yell at the parking lot attendant about why there are not enough parking spots and that they are very late and this isn't fair while there is a line of 20 other cars waiting for the same parking lot. The entitled friend with money will get very nasty with you when you can't just go out to dinner because you don't have the money or the child care or access to other resources that they have. They believe, entitled people believe, that their problems are worse than anyone else's, and entitled people think we want or need to hear them. They also don't have perspective. So they believe that everyone should just hop to it when they want or need something. And they also feel entitled to you knowing what that thing is. So basically, they feel entitled to you being able to read their minds. So you get entitlement. It's not just, I expect to be treated the way I deserve. It's, I don't give a damn about the other people because I'm the most special. While not all entitled people are narcissistic, I mean, some entitled people might be people who have always been, I don't know, really wealthy and don't know how to be with regular people, or it's cultural, where within one culture, things kind of go a certain way and certain people in a family structure are sort of VIP-ish, and they don't understand that in another culture, there may be rules, or it may just be privilege. And a person who has always gotten away with stuff because of their sort of preordained power and status that they might even have been born with. But if those people who have those kinds of privileges and things like that still have empathy, then it's just like that they're dumb. And they don't get how regular folks have to stand in lines and wait for stuff and don't have people who do stuff for us. It's that kind of thing. It's just dumb. All narcissistic people are entitled. But if someone said to me, pick the one quality that would be a true red flag for narcissism, absolutely, it would be entitlement. So all of that said, we know that many narcissistic people get into relationships with empathic people, largely because empathic people stick around, right? The empathic people, all of you with empathy, are more prone to trauma-bonded patterns, including things like making excuses, making justifications, making it work, right? And the interaction of entitlement in the narcissist and empathy in the other person in the relationship can help explain that. Entitlement only works because the rest of us work around it. We may not want to get into it in a coffee line, so we let the raging entitled super foamy latte oat milk hooey dooey matcha half-calf decaf drink orderer go ahead of us just so we can get them the hell out of there. Or we just roll our eyes in a restaurant and don't take the fight, and the poor server does end up bringing them their food faster because the manager just wants the customer to shut up and stop disrupting everyone in the restaurant. Or we just do things the way they want because it's just easier and it doesn't matter to us. So in a million small ways, they get enabled. That's not to say that we're doing this consciously or that we're at all responsible for their bad behavior, but we have to live our lives. And if we got into it with them over every little entitled thing that they do, it would be a full-time job. And it already feels like one to be in one of these relationships with a narcissistic person. The empathic people will often empathize with the narcissistic or the entitled person's tantrums and fall into things like, oh, that's just how the way they are, or let's see if we can find a solution. Those mindsets, which often characterize any of us who are empathic. Empathy isn't just about emotionally connecting with another person. It's also about attempting to understand the experience of the other person. And all of that empathic understanding can translate into trying to make it work for the narcissistic person. Things like, oh, they're upset, or I get it, it's hard to wait for your coffee when you're tired, or let me try and make it better because clearly they're struggling. Oh, they just want to eat at a certain time because they're hungry. Who wouldn't want to eat when they're hungry? So let's just make it happen for them, and then I'm sure everything will be fine. I get it. Waiting in line is terrible. So when they're upset about having to wait in line, I can totally understand that. These are the things that empathic people say. The empathy of so many people in narcissistic relationships, that concerted and genuine attempt to understand the point of view of the other person. When you try to do this and the other person is entitled, that's when it turns out to be a bit of a mess. Because you are the empathic person who's always making allowances for their behavior. Maybe they are tired. Maybe they are hungry. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe that's how they just grew up. Maybe this is really important to them, and on and on and on. And this empathy is such an important, wonderful quality in you. It really is. Empathy fosters social connections. It builds community. It creates supportive networks around you. It's good for you. Until it's not good for you. And it's not good for you when your empathy runs into a really entitled person. Empathy is not a switch. You can't just turn it on and off. The narcissistic people can, because their empathy is not at all deep. It's very superficial. They use it to get what they need, right? But if you truly have deep, emotional, compassionate empathy, it's there. And it will reflexively respond in pro-social, agreeable, collaborative ways. So you just can't turn off the tap. However, empathy can get depleted. If it's all empathy out and no empathy coming in, people who are in these situations don't turn narcissistic, right? Your empathy doesn't just go away. Instead, you become depleted, sad, depressed, anxious, exhausted, even a little hopeless. This all out and none in can also foster self-blame, with the empathic person being more likely to blame themselves than to take a critical look at the situation and recognize that they are trying to keep two-way traffic going on a one-lane road. And because of this, empathic people are not only more likely to get stuck in narcissistic relationships, they also find it more difficult to disengage from narcissistic relationships, and empathic people really do endure more harm as a result of these entitled narcissistic relationships. The one way giving will catch up with you. And in fact, many empathic people will become quite isolated and lonely as a result of narcissistic relationships. So the question becomes, what's the antidote? Remember that you can still be empathic while recognizing the toxic and harmful dynamics. And that empathy may mean that you're not turning around and you're not going to be mean or cruel to the narcissistic person, but to also recognize that there is nothing that you can do to please them. And also do a bit of empathy gymnastics and recognize that as much as you may want to empathize with them about how terrible it is that they have to wait in a line with the unwashed masses, when their entitled ideation is rewarded, it really emboldens them. It rewards their entitled behavior, and it makes it worse for all the other people who are going to someday be in their path. It's not that their entitlement will stop, but they may become less bold with it. If they're complaining, oh, I can't believe how long this line is, you can just nod your head and do a yeah. And that sort of little tight-lipped, that crazy, isn't it, kind of look, right? Empathizing with their entitlement may be natural, but when you empathize with it too much, it can take a tiger and turn it into a roaring one. Because ultimately, your empathy, like I said, is good for you. So take it to the good folks who not only will receive it as the gift it is, but will also return it. And when that one-lane road becomes a two-lane road again, you feel repleted and restored, and you feel like you're seeing things clearly. That empathy will allow you to create healthy relationships outside of your narcissistic ones that will help you heal and carve out a sense of self and a life separated from the life you've created with the narcissistic person. So the next time you see someone throwing an entitled tantrum anywhere, don't empathize. Do the tight-lipped smile nod. If you have to react at all, do that. And then just disengage. These patterns never change. And in the world we are living in now, which is far more dangerous than it once was, engaging with people who are throwing these tantrums, frankly, is downright dangerous. And it's not worth your time. Sadly, we do live in a world where walking around and not engaging with the narcissistic folks who are squealing and screaming because they didn't get their way is always the safest path forward. Save your empathy for people who can appreciate it.
This is honestly what I would consider to be the defining characteristic of narcissism. That means understanding what exactly is empathy. Empathy is the attempt or desire to understand the experience, typically the emotional experience of another person, And often then that is accompanied with a behavior to address that or to meet that empathic recognition. So for example, that might be offering a soothing word, doing something to support someone, or just helping them out. But at the core of it, it is attempting to understand the experience of another person. That means that you have an inherent interest in or curiosity about the other people around you, and most importantly, it means that you care. It doesn't necessarily mean, however, that you've had the same experience as them. The best example I can give of that is, let's say you don't have a child, but someone near you does, and that child is going through something difficult, so that your friend, their parent, is having a hard time. You don't have to have a child to understand that somebody who has a kid that's going through a tough time may need your support or soothing words or just a hug. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your experience. Empathy is that drive to even try to understand experiences that aren't your own. So now let's take this trait, this quality, lack of empathy, and sort of think about how it manifests in narcissistic personality styles. Where I often see this play out is that a person who is with a narcissist, so let's say a person is in a relationship with somebody narcissistic, and they listen day in and day out to their narcissistic partner, complaining about their job, complaining about the people at work, complaining about how they're not appreciated and they're under-regarded and no one knows how great they are at work and woe is me and all of that. And then one day you actually share about a tough day you're having and they barely look up from their phone and like, huh, what do you want me to do about this? I can't change this. I can't do anything about this. And you're like, what? Like, I've been listening to your stuff for 5 years, and one day I'm asking you to listen to one important thing, and you can't even come up with faking interest? That's what lack of empathy can look like. It can go much deeper than that. You could be going through a tough time, and they won't even stop to recognize that maybe you just need a little more help around the house, or you just need a shoulder to cry on, or you just need someone to get it and look you in the eye and try to understand how you're suffering. That absence of empathy is one of the most destabilizing characteristics of being with a narcissist. Now imagine you're the adult child or the child, the young child of a narcissistic parent. Their lack of empathy may mean that when you're suffering or struggling, they don't even stop to take notice, or they only do so when it's convenient for them. That can be devastating not only for a child, but also an adult child of a parent who feels like their parent doesn't care. And that right there is the core of the empathic deficit we see in narcissism. They really don't care. Sometimes people will say, it's interesting you say this, I'm with a narcissistic person, and sometimes it feels like they care. Sometimes they do. Because what narcissists do, in a way, they sort of weaponize empathy. They use it only for their gain. So let's say they need something from you. Then they actually may pay laser sharp attention to what you're about, how you're feeling, and what you're up to. So they can really say, oh my gosh, it sounds like you're going through such a tough time. And it's all a manipulation. It's all a sense of sort of putting this empathy on you or giving you the sense of being empathically regarded so that then you may actually give them money that they hope for, or give them time, or whatever else it is that they need from you. So they may use empathy more as a tool rather than it being an authentic expression or authentic desire to connect with you. And as many of you know, when we're talking about narcissism in the early phase of a relationship, we're talking about love bombing. Somebody who comes and lavishes you with attention and gifts and all of it. In those early phases, it can often feel like you're with the most empathic person in the world. They come to work, they pick you up, they offer to help you sort of get new things for your home. They offer to help you with other things you need to do. You're like, wow, this person totally gets me. Remember, they can turn the empathy on and off. It's not like they're incapable of it. They've got it in there, but by and large, they can't be bothered to use it because remember, they don't care. Over time, living with a narcissist, because of their lack of empathy, it can feel like you live in a house that has mirrors in it, but you never see your own reflection in them. Like I said, it's confusing, it's destabilizing. You often don't know where to turn to get your feelings met because you think you should be able to get that from the significant people in your life. But if they lack empathy, good luck with that. People wonder, is there anything I can do about this? Can I create more empathy in this person? Probably not. Empathy tends to be something that comes naturally. The sort of booby prize in all of this is something we call cognitive empathy. It's kind of empathy light. It's this idea that I get why you feel that way. Like, for example, let's say your partner cheats on you and you say, my God, you've devastated me. My heart's broken. You've betrayed me. And your partner sort of looks at me and says, yeah, I get why you feel that way. Not so useful. Doesn't make you feel good. So it's sort of like this sort of intellectual exercise in empathy, but it's not the real thing. Real empathy is accompanied by real emotion. It could be tears. It could be touch. It just could be gentle murmurs of reassurance. So they can produce it. They can use it as a tool. Sometimes they can even use it as a weapon. But one thing they can't really do is have it as the real deal. Lack of empathy is probably one of the most soul-sapping qualities in narcissism. If it's happening to you, you probably know it. Is it amenable to change? Not really.
A bad worker always blames their tools. You may or may not have heard this proverb, but this one actually has some pretty old origins, as all of these do. This one is traced to the 13th century French. I could not find a particular author associated with this. And then back then, the way that phrase translated from the French was that basically a bad tradesperson can never find the right tool. Now, I think you understand what the saying means, right? It makes sense at the face of it. If a person is unskilled, and on top of that is also uninsightful or lacks self-reflective capacity, they blame the lack of a tool rather than their own inability or their own irresponsibility. It's a bit like victimhood mixed with blame. So when we take this proverb, a bad worker blames their tools, we take this one and we elevate it beyond the tools. Really what it's saying, it's a glimpse at the blame deflection that is a central core of narcissism. Narcissists have a very hard time taking responsibility or blame, so they push it out. So just like that bad worker who blames the shoddy work on a lack of tools or blames their inability to fix something on not having the right tool, the narcissistic personality will blame everyone in their lives for the mistakes that they make. People with this personality style blame others for their failures, for their disappointments, for their stress, for their frustrations. This makes these relationships incredibly challenging because you're constantly being blamed for their issues. In fact, in the early conversations with a narcissistic individual, when you first meet them, you will actually find yourself trying to engage with their blaming. You'll say things like, I didn't do that. That's not my fault. No, really, I'm not the one who did that. And on and on and on. You know where that goes. Now, really, at these times, reality doesn't matter to them at those times with those personality styles. Reality doesn't matter to people who are narcissistic. It's all about them being able to cast blame out so they can maintain their grandiose and perfectionistic version of themselves. I don't make mistakes. It's everybody else's fault. The bad sales presentation wasn't their fault. It was the client's fault for rescheduling. It was the assistant's fault for not getting the materials organized on time. It was their partner's fault for not keeping the house quieter while they were preparing for the sales presentation. It's everybody else's fault. And that blame deflection is a classical element of these relationships, the proverbial bad tools. The blame projection and deflection of the narcissistic relationship, honestly, for a lot of people who go through these relationships, is one of the most exhausting, destabilizing, confusing, and manipulating parts of these relationships. Sort of them not being able to find their tools and blaming everyone else often means that other people end up taking too much responsibility, even for things that they are not responsible for. So the person who's not the narcissist takes on all the responsibility. It's not their responsibility. And because of taking all this responsibility for things you didn't even do, that can really result to holding on to negative emotions like guilt and self-blame. And over time, if you spend enough time with a person who's narcissistic, they don't even have to blame you after a while. You get so indoctrinated into their way of thinking that you self-blame before they can blame you. It's almost like after a while, you just sort of cut out the manipulative middleman and you do it to yourself. Sometimes people who find themselves in narcissistic relationships, now whether this is a family of origin relationship, whether this is an intimate relationship or a workplace relationship, they will try and overcompensate by making sure that everything is hyper controlled. So you're in a relationship with a narcissistic individual, you might try to compensate by making sure everything's very controlled, very organized. This can be exhausting. People in these relationships will find themselves almost at an obsessive and almost compulsive level of trying to control the environment, of trying to control their own words or their own behaviors enough. So the possibility of activating the blame-shifting tirade in the narcissist is minimized. And then you just keep appeasing and enabling the narcissist. You've got the house so organized that if they're like, it's your fault I couldn't find the scissors are exactly where they need to be. It's really difficult because to steer clear of being blamed by someone else who is clearly not taking responsibility means that you have to work on your own sense of self-assurance, to be clear and aware on what you are responsible for, to be clear and aware of what you're not responsible for, and understand that some of it is gray and that there is shared responsibility. The narcissistic individual is engaged in a very unconscious and a very primitive process of projection and offloading of shameful or uncomfortable deficits that they don't want to have to keep stirring in themselves. And so they project them onto other people. And the narcissistic disconnection from empathy actually means it's easier to blame others because you don't stop to think, they don't stop to think, how would someone feel if I blame them for this when they're not really responsible? The challenge is that the blame shifting is also often coupled with victimization and a sense of persecution. A person who is narcissistic will say, I can't find the right tool, and that's because nobody supports me having the right tools, or they hide my tools. Things like, I screwed up the sales presentation because people are out to get me, and nobody believes in me or wants to support me. That self-victimization is such a classical piece of the narcissistic personality style. So whomever was this frustrated French writer who watched people do a lousy job and blame other people actually did a really nice job of capturing this dynamic of the bad worker blaming their tools and clearly telling us that this is a part of what human behavior and difficult human behavior and what some people do and have always done for hundreds of years, not taking responsibility and then blaming something or someone else for their failings. But it's always best in these blame-shifty times not to engage or to engage minimally. If they blame you for something that is clearly really something you didn't do, you just nod politely and just say a gentle, okay. Document when needed, and then recognize that they're never going to listen to your version of the events. Some people say, it's unjust, it's unjust. Why shouldn't they hear that I'm not the one responsible? It is unjust, and they aren't listening. We are taught that loyalty means sticking by someone no matter what, right? It means having a person's back. It means showing up as a united front with people you're supposed to be loyal to. And this is most often family, spouses, partners, I mean, even friends, and in the workplace as well. I think any of you who know enough about narcissism already know where I'm going in this video. Now, in narcissistic systems, this virtue, if you will, of loyalty is unhealthy. I would even argue that it's dangerous. Now, because we are told loyalty is a virtue, there is often the assumption that more loyalty, and loyalty with conviction, the more loyalty, the better. More loyalty is always going to be better, right? And narcissistic relationships, narcissistic families is where loyalty goes to hell. So let's break that down. Now listen, in many families, loyalty means you stand by the family. You don't break ranks. You don't drop a proverbial dime on them. You stick together. In intimate relationships, loyalty is even built into vows, right? In richer or poorer, in sickness or health, in good times and bad. That's all about loyalty, right? You're supposed to stick around according to all those ups and downs, right? Loyalty. In a friendship, a loyal friend has your back. They might come back to you and say, listen, I heard something I think it's important for you to hear. They don't keep secrets. They don't make you look bad to other people. As a loyal employee, you stick with the company or institution or business. You may work harder during tough times. We're clear on what loyalty is. And I got to tell you, sounds like a great idea in theory. Especially when good people are loyal, it's good. We don't spend enough time talking about sort of the dynamics of loyalty, right? Because it really, done right, is a two-way street. You stick by the friend or the family or the business or the partner or the spouse. But what if they aren't loyal? At what point is loyalty on a one-way street self-harm? In narcissistic family systems, it's a mess. Because in a narcissistic family system, you are given the message that loyalty means that you endure anything that happens in the family. That being in a family means sticking together, no matter what. That means that if you are the truth seer or the truth teller in a family system, or the scapegoat that has finally had it, or you're sick and tired of the gaslighting and the abuse and the harm, and you do speak out and you say enough, or you stop showing up, or you distance yourself, or you point out the toxic family members' patterns to maybe other people in the family or just to other people, or you share what a toxic family member said. More often than not, the person who speaks out, the person who breaks ranks, as it were, they're viewed as disloyal, because loyalty in narcissistic families means put up and shut up. It means staying silent in the face of the narcissistic abuse. It means letting the status quo remain and allowing the toxic person to run roughshod and for the enablers to remain enabling. The difficulty really arises if you view yourself as a loyal person, and you likely are, and you try to be that stand-up person, that person who does good by others and stick by them. It might be a core value for you. But loyalty is not meant to be masochism. Loyalty is not meant to be stand around and be taken advantage of. The problem is that loyalty is this sort of diffuse virtue that the toxic, controlling, narcissistic folks have really capitalized on this, because they use this concept of loyalty as a way to squeeze out and pressure the person who is trying to call attention to what is wrong in the system. And the further issue is that if you really do, if you're one of those people who holds loyalty as a core value or a defining characteristic of yourself or emblematic of integrity, and then you do speak out, you do say, listen, this isn't okay, and then you are called out as being disloyal, you may actually find yourself internalizing their criticism and wondering if maybe you are the problem, that maybe you are actually, God forbid, disloyal. You're a problematic person. After all, you may be the only one in that system that spoke out, the only one who is pointing out a parent's behavior as problematic or your sibling as being an issue. And when everyone in the family stares blankly back at you, even though at some level many of them know the truth, the person who tells the truth becomes the disloyal one in the narcissistic system. We see this happen in politics all the time, on all sides of the aisle, right? If someone speaks out against a corrupt political party, they're often seen as not being patriotic enough or as betraying their politics and the values of their party, that they have somehow been corrupted. We see this happen in institutional settings when the whistleblower is called out as not being a team player and is not being loyal to the mission and vision of the organization. We see this in marriages and long-term relationships, where when people are told that marriages are sacred unions, even when you're being betrayed every single day, and that you should not speak out against a spouse and be a united front. We still criticize people who speak out about what is happening in their toxic marriages publicly, as though they're disloyal for speaking about the harm they endured in a relationship. And listen, cults are some of the purest examples of narcissistic relationships, right? And they are founded and kept in place by this concept of unquestioned loyalty. That if you were a true believer, you would never speak out against the group or its founders or members. And since cults do their work through isolating people and gaslighting them, most people in these groups feel too confused or scared or alone to say something for a long time. They don't want to be disloyal to a group that they felt that they belonged to, that they may even believe saved them or changed them, or gave them things that they wanted or represent something that they believe in. Many people in spiritual and religious communities have been narcissistically abused by a religious leader or group, and that they're told and basically understand that to say anything meant that you were being disloyal to a higher power. It's tough to fight that. But we keep hitting people over the head with this idea of loyalty, and we've turned it into too simplistic a value. There is no place for loyalty with someone who behaves cruelly or manipulatively or abusively or dismissively or coercively. The word loyalty does not apply in these situations. Don't give me some BS about how toxicity is subjective. It's not. Any behavior, any conduct in a relationship that leaves people scared, unseen, unheard, invalidated, dismissed, minimized, that's toxic. And stepping away from that is not disloyal, it's self-salvation. Over and over, I have had people say to me that they didn't say anything about what happened in their families of origin. And this would be about anything ranging from repeated and violent abuse in all forms, to emotional abuse, to lies and betrayals that ran through the family. Narcissism flourishes when silence is reinforced. And folks in these families internalized the message that to speak out, to say anything, would be disloyal. And that family matters are private matters. And did you want to hurt everyone by talking badly about the family? Organizations of all kinds, from families to companies to governments to cults, always weaponize loyalty. They take what is often held up as a top-shelf virtue and use it to imprison the people being harmed by the perpetrations of these systems. I actually don't think we ever really talk about circumspect loyalty. We treat it as a black or white thing. You're either loyal or you're not. But loyalty, like respect, is something that should be earned. And that to be loyal to an abuser, that's not loyalty, it's fear, it's coercion, it's trauma bonding, but it's sure as hell not loyalty. Loyalty has to be a two-way street, engaged in by a person towards another person, group, or institution that has earned it and shows its loyalty back through how it treats the person within it. Listen, we live in a world where the narcissistic folks have taken this idea of loyalty and turned it into a tool of subjugation. And in that world, being disloyal, interestingly, may be the only way of saving yourself and ultimately being loyal to yourself and to the folks in your life who may actually be reciprocating and responsible recipients of that loyalty. So when you hear people talking about loyalty, and every narcissistic group does this, they're like, you're speaking out? You're not being very loyal because they know more often than not that will shut down the dissenters. So trauma bonds are created by the alternation of bad and good, a good day and a bad day, idealization and devaluation. Sometime back on my podcast, the actress and writer Rebecca Humphreys, she said it the most beautifully when she said in the narcissistic relationship she was in, it was like getting pushed off a 100-story building, and then the narcissist manages to be the one to catch you just as you are about to hit the ground. So they are not just your abuser, they also become your savior. And that is how trauma bonds get created and reinforced. It only works if we have some attachment and desire. And the desire has to be for the relationship to work. And since these trauma bonds are with people we love, with family members or partners, people we care about, we get caught in this toxic dance that can keep us stuck in perpetuity. So let's take Rebecca's analogy. That one thing that can happen often in toxic relationships is that they devalue, they demean, they insult, they argue. And once they feel better, it's almost like they've let it all out, then they go in for the hug. Let me give you an example of how this can look. Let's say it's a situation where they can't find their keys and they believe that you moved them. They say, "Hey, where are my keys? Seriously, where are my keys?" You may respond, "I don't know, I haven't seen them today." They say, yes, you have. You have seen my keys. You had to have seen them. I came home and I put them here, and you always move my stuff. You are so damn disorganized. Look at this mess. You don't put stuff away. I am so sick of it. You have ruined my day. I need to go out in 10 minutes to go pick up that stuff, and if I don't do it, then my entire day is going to be messed up. How could you do this to me? How could you mess with my keys? Now, imagine they're sort of saying this relatively loudly, like I was trying to show, and you really, really did not touch their keys. Some of you may go and try to look for the keys. Others of you may be having a freeze response and just sort of stuck. Some of you may fight back. But most of you will not feel well at this point. There'll be more yelling. They're trying to find them. They're still yelling. Then they say, "To hell with it. I am taking your car. Too bad if you need it." And they grab their coat and they put it on, and voila, their car keys are in their pocket. They feel that pocket. They hear the jingle and they say, "Got 'em." And then, "I'm heading out. No apology." But as they're about to head out, and this is the part that's not okay, they may come in for a hug. They'll say, "Okay, come on, let's make up." And they'll come in for the hug or the kiss. You, meanwhile, at this point, may feel once again sick, exhausted, depleted, scared, or triggered, but they want to snuggle or have a kiss, and "let's make up" makes no sense because they were the ones screaming at you for something you didn't do, so it was largely a one-sided argument. If you even want to call it an argument, because there was no other side to it. Let me give you another scenario. You have an argument with them. They yell and they insult and they invalidate and they scream and they may storm off or leave. And then when you see them later, they come home in a good mood and they just want to snuggle. So this pairing of physical affection, when you have not had the opportunity to process the harms of what they have done, is not good for you. I'm not even sure if you process it, it's good for you. It feels intrusive and uncomfortable. And if you try to push them away or freeze up or don't respond, they're going to tell you that you're difficult and unforgiving. But at a somatic level, to have the person who just psychologically harmed you then try to touch you in a soothing or intimate manner, for a lack of a better way to say it, it feels kind of gross. And once again, you may feel as though there's no response you're allowed to have, because if you push back or don't respond to them, it all starts again. It's always important to remember that narcissistic folks use conflict to regulate. The yelling and the screaming and the abuse allow them to reassert their power. And as they shatter you, they feel better. So after they feel better, and that coupled with their lack of empathy, then as far as they're concerned, everything's fine. And they come in for the hug, or they just assume that you want to snuggle because the argument's done. And they play upon the self-blame and your self-doubt, because when you push back or say, like, I'm not hugging you, we're going to have to talk about this more, or you just say it doesn't feel okay, then you become the bad person who can't let go of stuff. It feels very violating when someone swoops in for a hug or a snuggle or a kiss after they have harmed you, and there has not been a period of time for you to talk it out or work it through. Everything is on their time frame, and the more that happens, the worse it feels. Things in this kind of relationship feel like they are happening to you and not with you. You are basically relegated to being an object, a sort of adult pacifier that they use to regulate. And when they are done with the yelling, they will want to regulate by being held. It's really not much different than a tantruming toddler that screams and cries and just starts yelling in the middle of a store, and then they need a hug from the parent afterwards. But there's a big difference, that toddler is 3, not 53. But many people are confused and really put off and confused by this dynamic. It definitely is something that reinforces, as you can imagine, the trauma bond. And it can also reinforce the sense that somehow you're the one who's closed off, you're the one who's mean, you're the one who's cold or unforgiving if you don't just go with it. It's not true, but it's an absolute catch-22, because there's no way you can talk about it with them, to share your feelings. And then there is the stuckness, and that tees up the self-blame. The key is to understand this dynamic so you can at least start to identify it and slowly maybe even break out of some of the self-blame cycles as well as the self-doubt, because you're not going to really be able to fix the situation. Therapy can be a place to address the feelings that a dynamic like this brings up. But when someone goes from rage to affection, it's very normal to not want to hug back. In fact, almost feel disgusted at the idea of hugging back. It's not you being closed off or distant or holding a grudge. It's that other person of not having no empathy or absolutely no awareness of how their behavior is affecting you. So if that dynamic happens to you, be aware it is quite harmful. It reinforces the trauma bond. And when they simultaneously put themselves in this position as tyrant and tormentor and lover and hugger and carer of perpetrator and then savior, there's really no winning at that game. And it really helps you understand why this relationship is not only so difficult to remain sort of sane in, but even more difficult if you want to get out of.